Fala pessoal do Diário do Centro do Mundo, entrevista exclusiva aqui no DCM com o ex-integrante da inteligência da CIA, John Kiriakou. Vai conceder uma entrevista exclusiva para a gente hoje, comentando um pouco a respeito de uma reportagem recente do Financial Times a respeito das eleições no Brasil e o papel dos Estados Unidos aqui no Brasil. A entrevista vai ser toda em inglês. Nós vamos traduzir no site, vamos ter também uma versão legendada aqui no nosso vídeo, e eu quero chamar o John para conversar aqui um pouco conosco. Hi, John, how are you?
Hey,
you are
very well, thank you.
From Washington?
Yes, in Washington.
Washington, D.C. John, a Financial Times, history claims that parts of U.S. government, including the Army, the CIA, the State Department, the Pentagon, and even the White House campaigned to maintain the 2002 elections and Lula's victory. What explains this change of behavior of them?
Right. Well, as you well know, the CIA and the American intelligence community had very close relations with President Bolsonaro. There was a deep belief here in the United States that Bolsonaro was the partner in Brazil that the CIA preferred to deal with. If the Financial Times article is to be believed, and normally their sourcing is very, very good. I know several of the Financial Times reporters here in Washington, and they're top journalists. So if that reporting is to be believed, something changed in US policy. And I would have to think that the change was that Donald Trump was no longer president here in Washington, that Joe Biden was. And Joe Biden knew President Lula. He had worked with President Lula in the past. And the determination was made that it would be better for the United States if Lula were president again. Now, that's not to say that the American government, the CIA, the intelligence community has the authority or even the ability to decide who gets to be president of what country, especially a major power like Brazil. But with that said, what they can do is offer clandestine assistance. Maybe it's money for a campaign. Maybe it's influence operations in the media. There are a million different ways in which they can offer clandestine assistance to help a foreign candidacy. I'm not saying that happened. I'm saying that it's possible, and it makes sense to me.
This change of government, and there is another part of this article, this FT article, that Tom Shannon, former top state official, says that Lula has a ton of anger and resentment. There is reflect in international relations. Is the new Brazilian president wrong to criticize the American imperialist or to do relationships with China and Russia? What's your opinion about it?
Oh, not only is he not wrong, I think that this is a very wise course of policy. Frankly, and I don't have to tell you this, of course, but the United States has such a dark history of imperialism, especially in Central and South America. I think that every country in the region would be wise to cultivate good and healthy and strong and equal relations with China and Russia and with India, frankly. So I would expect, especially a country as strong and as successful and as big as Brazil, in order to continue to grow the Brazilian economy, to provide for the Brazilian people, I think that it's better and healthier if Brazil has good relations with all of the major countries of the world. Brazil should not be under the auspices, under the wing of the United States. Brazil should have strong relations with China and Russia and the other BRICS countries, and any country, frankly, that has something to offer to Brazil, to the Brazilian people, and to the Brazilian economy.
Brazil for Brazilians, right?
Exactly.
If we talk like that distortion, like Donald Trump said,
Exactly
America
right.
first, a little bit for Brazilian is good, right?
That's right. Exactly.
There's another question. In 2021, you do a interview with Sara Vivaco, my colleague, and you said the Operation Lava Jato had an American partnership powered by hate and money. Today, one of these stars of Lava Jato, the former prosecutor Deltan Dallagnol, is an impeached deputy. Is no longer deputy. What has changed about Lava Jato and the support that FBI and the American establishment has offered for them?
Well, here in the United States, we had this failed experiment, really, with Donald Trump, and not just Donald Trump as a person, with the idea of an outsider president, someone who was going to drain the swamp. He said, the swamp that is Washington, and we saw the same thing kind of happening in Brazil with Bolsonaro's election as president. I think that a lot of people got caught up in this idea of a populist social movement, a populist social experiment that actually didn't work out very well, not for either one of our countries. Now, one of the problems that I've always had, not always, one of the problems that I have with American policy toward Brazil is the idea that we need to help and to encourage any candidate that would identify as the most pro-American candidate out there. That didn't work with Bolsonaro. It was bad for Brazil. It was bad for the United States. And at the same time, there was a President Lula, who was wronged. He was wronged by the court system. He was wronged by the United States and its wrong-headed policy. He ended up going to prison, which was just such an incredible miscarriage of justice. I'm amazed that the man can forgive anybody. But we saw the same thing here in the United States, where people just overstepped their bounds. They overstepped into the realm of illegality and inappropriateness. And I'm sorry to say that we pulled Brazil in that same direction.
Remember your history with CIA and denouncing them. I have a question. Like, John, you became famous for denouncing Al Qaeda prisoner interrogation program, which involves torture. Now we have Lava Jato whistleblowers accusing prosecutors who receive America training of extortion. Has the USA method been exported to Latin America? And I have an additional question. Do you identify yourself, your history, a little bit in Lula imprisonment, like you have been in prison because of you are told about CIA?
I do. You know what? I wear my prison sentence as a badge of honor. I spent 23 months in prison after blowing the whistle on the CIA's torture program. I was right. They were wrong. And I'm proud of what I did. I did denounce the CIA. I continue to denounce the CIA. And you ask a very good question here, a very important question. Has the CIA exported those crimes to Latin America? And the honest answer is, we don't know, because they won't tell us. Now, we are supposed to just take the CIA's word for it. I spent 15 years at the CIA. I know that they lie about literally everything. So they say, "Oh, no, we don't export these techniques to other countries." I don't know if we can believe them. They tell us that they don't torture anybody. They tell us that they don't have secret prisons. They tell us that they don't have an assassination program. They tell us that they don't have an international kidnapping and rendition program. I don't know what the truth is. And I know that our congressional oversight is so weak that it's not even able to tell us what the truth is. So you ask this question, have they exported this kind of interrogation regime to Latin America? Maybe they have.
Yeah.
I don't know. But I wouldn't trust what they say. And to answer the second part of your question, yes, I very much identify with President Lula because of the time, that he spent in prison. You know, for a very brief period of time, I was ashamed to have been in prison. And then while I was in prison, I happened to call my wife one day, and she said that someone had asked my son, who was very young at the time. He was 8 or 9 years old. Is it true your father is in prison? And he said, yes, but Martin Luther King was in prison too. And so I understood then that this was nothing to be ashamed of. And even my son as a child understood what I did and why I did it. And that made it all worthwhile.
Very strong answer. I love it. Just take another question. You said that CIA has betrayed you. Why is that?
Because on my very first day at the CIA, along with 300 other people, I put my right hand up in the air, and I swore to uphold the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic. Now, what that meant was I was swearing to uphold the Constitution of the United States. And the Constitution is, you know, it's a living, breathing document. We are supposed to be a nation of laws. We're supposed to be a nation that claims to be a shining example of respect for human rights and civil liberties. But that is not what a torture program does. That's not what kidnapping does, or a secret prison program, or an assassination program. Either we're going to live by the laws that we've given ourselves, or we're not. Either we're going to lobby other countries, to pressure other countries to respect human rights, or we're not. I'm going to give you an example. When I was with the CIA, I actually spent 2 years on assignment at the State Department. And while I was at the State Department, I was the human rights officer. And my job, part of my job, was to write the annual human rights report that was sent to Congress. So what happens when I go into the Minister of Interior's office and I say, Your Excellency, you cannot kill a 15-year-old child because he marched in a pro-democracy demonstration. I'm going to have to put this in the human rights report and send it to Congress. But then 15 minutes later, the CIA station chief goes into the minister's office and says, don't listen to the human rights guy. We want you to open a secret prison here where we can torture prisoners, or you can torture them for us and you give us the information that they give. Well, who's he going to listen to? Is he going to listen to the CIA station chief with his millions of dollars in secret aid? Or is he going to listen to me because I'm going to write a report and send it to Congress? So you see how my hands were tied. And as a country, we have to make a decision. And that decision is whether or not we want to be on the side of law and order, the side of constitutional rights, or the side of the outlaws. I was on the side of right.
You said you are more than a decade in the CIA. There is any positive experience you have experienced inside there, or not?
You know what? Nobody's ever asked me that before. I will say that it was the most exciting job I ever had in my life. Every other job I've ever had, I've compared to that job, and nothing compares. I'll add that the travel was incredible. I went to 70 countries. I met kings and prime ministers and presidents and did things that my friends could only dream of. But then at the same time, we have to respect other people and other countries and other systems and other forms of government. We have to respect basic human rights and civil liberties. And I think the way the organization is structured, where it operates completely in secrecy and it does not have appropriate oversight from the congressional committees, the House and Senate Intelligence Committees, makes it so that it's more like an outlaw organization than anything else. So for me personally, there were times when I had a lot of fun. But looking back over the course of a 15-year career, there were problems that were far bigger than just one man. Problems that might be insurmountable.
Mm-hmm. Good. There is you said you traveled to a lot of countries. Returning to Lula's case, how do you see like President Lula position in relation of war in Ukraine and the relationship he tries to maintain with President Biden simultaneously in the same time?
I think that the current Brazilian policy is really the wisest possible policy, especially for this period right now. If we are going to be activists for peace, and I believe President Lula is an activist for peace, then we have to really be activists for peace. War should be wrong under all circumstances. Now, I understand why the Russians did what they did. I do. I understand it. The Americans intervened in Ukraine in 2014 and overthrew a legitimate government. So I understand the Russian policy. At the same time, if war is wrong, then war is wrong. One of the things that I really like about the Brazilian policy right now is that the Brazilians, as well as the Turks and the Chinese, have offered multiple times to host talks between the Russians and the Ukrainians. It's been the United States that's rejected those talks. So the Lula policy of engaging with both the Biden administration and the Putin administration, as well as a concurrent policy to promote the idea of peace talks, is absolutely the way to go. And I know that it's very difficult for a policy like this to succeed, especially when the two sides are engaged in active hostilities. But I think President Lula needs to keep pushing this line, that he needs to keep up this policy, because in the end, I believe he's going to be proven correct.
And what do you think about Chinese posture during this war? You think it's more like Lula's or more like Putin?
Oh, I think it's more like Lula's. There's more to this for the Chinese than there is just the Chinese government offering to mediate. Look at what else the Chinese have done in the very recent past. The Chinese brought the Saudis and the Iranians together. I'm hard-pressed to think of two countries that hate each other more than Iran and Saudi Arabia. Maybe North and South Korea, okay. But the fact that the Chinese not only brought these two sides together, but encouraged them to successfully reopen relations and scale back the war in Yemen, I think is a dramatic success. Now, the only reason why the Chinese have not been able to bring the Ukrainians and the Russians together is because the United States rejects it. You know, the United States is upset that the Chinese had this success with Iran and Saudi Arabia. They don't want to see yet another diplomatic success between Ukraine and Russia because of China. And so that's why there hasn't been any forward movement. In the meantime, you have the Chinese now mediating between the Saudis and the Syrians, and they've reopened relations. Now we have the Syrians reopening relations with the Egyptians and the Iranians reopening relations with Egyptians. This is all coming out of Chinese diplomacy. So I really believe that the Brazilian position and the Chinese position are very close. The positions are to encourage diplomacy and to encourage everybody to talk. I think eventually, when the two sides get tired, they'll end up at that negotiating table.
It's necessary.
It is
urgent. On Twitter, you already defined Donald Trump as a loser for not being able to be reelected. However, some analysts see difficulty in Biden's re-election.
Yes.
Can Donald Trump and his extremists return to the presidency in United States?
I acknowledge that Joe Biden is probably the weakest candidate that the Democratic Party can nominate for president. But I believe that Donald Trump is so weak that he's actually the only person who could lose to Joe Biden. If the Republicans nominate anybody else, I think Biden would have a tough time. Biden's an old man. The economy is not great right now. and he's just seen as weak. With that said, Donald Trump is seen as a criminal. Even though the Republicans appear to be rallying around Donald Trump, Trump has very little support among independents and virtually no support at all among Democrats. I really believe if he's the nominee, he's going to lose, and I think he'll lose pretty handily. Anybody else is going to give Joe Biden a tough time.
Do you think, like Trump, Jair Bolsonaro here in Brazil is also as weak as?
I do think he's weak. When Bolsonaro lost the presidency and then appeared to run off to Florida, it took so many of us by surprise. There were pictures of him on social media buying food in the grocery store, sitting in a restaurant, all by himself. And people were saying, what is this? What happened to this man? Certainly he has legal problems in Brazil. He has political problems, the same kind of political problems that Donald Trump has. I just can't imagine that after a term in office that Brazilians would be ready to go back to him again.
Some other journalists and some other analysts says, and even President Lula says that he has good relationship with George Bush, a former Republican, that guy who started everything in Afghanistan and Iraq.
Yes.
And some analysts says that Obama and Biden are worst for the rest of the world than the Republicans. What do you think about this?
I actually think there's something to that. Everybody liked George W. Bush as a person. Not everybody liked him as a president, but I think many Americans realized that he wasn't really the president, that Dick Cheney was really the president. But by all accounts, and you'll hear this from both Republicans and Democrats, George W. Bush was a nice guy. He was somebody that you would want to go out and drink a beer with. Barack Obama, not so much. I'm biased against Obama because I thought Obama sold out to the national security state. It was Obama that prosecuted 8 national security whistleblowers and put all of us in prison. That's 3 times as many as all previous American presidents combined. And Joe Biden is an extension of the Obama White House and the Obama foreign policy. And it's not even as good as the Obama foreign policy. At least Obama had opened relations with Cuba. Yes. And Joe Biden has not reopened the relations with Cuba that were closed during the Trump administration. So, how crazy is it that all these years later, we're looking back and saying, oh, I miss the good old days of George W. Bush. It's crazy to even think, but that's where we've arrived. And let me tell you one other thing. In the halls at the CIA during the George W. Bush administration, we used to marvel at how hard that State Department worked to not talk to our enemies. Like if you're in the State Department, if you're a diplomat, your job is to carry out diplomacy. Your job is to talk to everybody. Your job is to put forth American foreign policy goals. And they worked very hard to not talk to our enemies, to not engage in diplomacy. As you said, it was George W. Bush that launched the war in Afghanistan and the war in Iraq. But then we have Saint Obama, who becomes president, and all of a sudden we're fighting in Syria, we're fighting in Libya, we're fighting in Somalia, we're still fighting in Iraq, we're still fighting in Afghanistan. Well, what's the difference? It was,
and we killed
worse.
Bin Laden, and there's
exactly
nothing changes.
Nothing changed. Exactly. It was very disappointing.
Yeah. Another question related to war in Ukraine. The Washington Post said that U.S. spy agencies pick up intelligence in mid-June indicating that Wagner mercenary chief Yevgeny Prigozhin was planning an armed action against the Russian defense establishment. Is this possible that the CIA is helping Prigozhin or the Russian mercenaries?
It's possible, certainly. I'll tell you, if the war were not taking place right now, what would have likely happened is the CIA would have warned President Putin that something was afoot. This has happened twice in the past, where NSA or the CIA picked up intelligence that there were legitimate threats to the Russian government. And so President George H.W. Bush at one point warned President Gorbachev that there was going to be a coup attempt against him, and Gorbachev was able to kill this coup before it took place. And then a few years later, the CIA picked up intelligence that there was going to be a coup attempt against President Yeltsin, and they warned Yeltsin in advance so that he could respond. So there's a precedent for warning the president of Russia that something is afoot. They did not warn him this time. And I would have to assume that this news came from a leak from the CIA. So it's certainly possible that the CIA either was assisting the Wagner Group in some way or decided just to stay out of it because any attempt to move on Moscow would weaken Putin, and the CIA wants Putin to be weakened.
Wants Putin to get weakened, but the coup didn't prospect at this time. What do you think it's happening?
I think Prigozhin overplayed his hand very badly. You know, Prigozhin said in the last few days that he had 25,000 men that were willing to move on Moscow. That just wasn't true. It was more like 2,500 men or 3,000 men. And, you know, he said that he had taken the town of Rostov-on-Don. That also wasn't true. He had taken control of one military base in Rostov. He just didn't have the backing to support his rhetoric and his threats. And then when he received his call from President Lukashenko saying that Lukashenko had spoken with Putin and Putin was willing to allow Prigozhin to go into exile in Belarus, he took that out. But I think that what we would have seen had he continued on to Moscow would have been a bloodbath.
Totally. There is another question about this case. Rebecca Kufler, an ex-CIA analyst, has claimed that Vladimir Putin orchestrated the coup with Wagner mercenary chief Yevgeny Prigozhin in a classic false flag to try to make the West believe his army had weakened. Do you agree with that?
No, I don't. He doesn't need to convince the West of anything. The West is going to be convinced one way or the other based on what's happening on the battlefield. You know, this is a problem that I have with a lot of CIA analysts or former CIA analysts, is that everything's a false flag. Well, you know how complicated false flags are? You know how many moving parts there are in a false flag where everything has to go exactly according to plan for it to actually work? Listen, after 15 years at the CIA, I can tell you there are a lot of stupid people at the CIA. There are a lot of people who have no idea what they're doing. There are a lot of people who just are not equipped to think over the course of the long term. Plus, the CIA, like any big organization, is a slow, bureaucratic kind of organization. They're not able to make decisions quickly to make these kinds of things happen. So, no, I'm not a believer in the false flag narrative.
Okay. Just a curiosity of mine. We saw some news about the improvement of AI and such thing in the technology area. Do you think the CIA is now using this kind of thing to make decisions or to make operations?
Absolutely, yes. Absolutely, 100% yes. In fact, the CIA
you saw this when you worked there?
Oh, when I was still there, when AI was just a fantasy of the tech companies, yes, they were working on this. The CIA put up tens of millions of dollars in something called InQtel. This is a venture capital arm of the CIA where they use taxpayer money to invest in cutting edge technology. It's come to billions and billions of dollars. And so the CIA is able to use this technology when it's still in the testing stages. I'm confident that the CIA was among the very earliest users of artificial intelligence, and I would expect that a lot of these decisions that we're seeing coming out of CIA can be attributed to AI or the war games and war gaming, the planning that we're seeing coming out of the intelligence community can be attributed to AI. I believe that we're going to see a lot more of this in the future.
Like we have the improvement of army with drones.
Yes.
This all connected, right?
All connected. Even 20 years ago, who would have considered, the level of drone warfare that we have today? Nobody could have even thought of such a thing, but they were thinking about it at the CIA. Now we're talking about these robots or robot dogs. You've seen, on Netflix in the show Black Mirror, these robot dogs. Well, these are a reality now. It's these automated things, these robots that are going to be fighting wars. There won't be human beings fighting wars.
That's why the US and even the CIA has a lot of has a lot of fears with the Chinese with 5G, 6G, and their technology and their own social networks and the ecosystem, and this relationship with Russia.
Yes, you're exactly right. It's not just an arms race that we're all experiencing. It's a technology race. And, the United States has made a decision to spend more money on the military than the next 8 largest countries combined. Or to look at it another way, the United States has a bigger defense budget than the smallest 144 countries combined. The Chinese have elected to spend their money on research and development and on international development and on the Belt and Road program and investing in rare earth metals and investing in infrastructure in places like China and East Asia. And now the United States, we can't figure out how we've begun falling behind the Chinese. Well, the answer is very easy, because we made a decision to spend our money on one thing, and the Chinese made a decision to spend their money on another thing. And so I fear that the United States is going to fall behind China on these advanced technology issues simply because we don't have the money to do the kind of research that the Chinese do.
Yeah, smart cities and all this
Exactly.
stuff.
Exactly.
Another question more in the West. We have the judgment of Julian Assange. Maybe Julian Assange will be extradited to United States.
Yes.
Do you think Biden may pardon Julian Assange, or you abandon that idea?
That's a tough one. Listen, I hope he pardons Julian Assange. I don't think he will. I will say, and this is just my own analysis, this is not based on any inside information, but things seem to have gone very quiet over the last 3 weeks or so with Julian Assange. The British High Court rejected his appeal of his extradition. And so he's allowed to seek clarification of the decision, and then he can appeal to the European Court of Human Rights. There is a precedent for the European Court of Human Rights to block the extradition. I hope that happens. But I've heard rumors that Julian's attorneys in the United Kingdom are in some sort of discussions with the U.S. Justice Department that would allow Julian to plead guilty to some crime, I don't know what, and he would be sentenced to time served and expelled from the UK back home to Australia. That would be a wonderful, wonderful development. Thank goodness that the United States and the UK are under pressure from the Australian government and from the Brazilian government to release Julian Assange and allow him to return to Australia. I hope that the tide has begun to change and people are able to see that it would be a terrible mistake to prosecute a journalist and publisher, because to do so would allow for the prosecution and persecution of every national security journalist who writes anything at all based on information that the American government deems to be classified or national defense information. This would be a slippery slope into fascism, really, something that would be a terrible mistake that our country would make.
What do you think? Why do you think this Julian Assange situation gets to these terms? Because of the silence of media, because of the government of United States. What the reasons you think Julian is in such trouble?
It's a combination. It's a combination of reasons, and this is not specific to either the Democrats or to the Republicans. They're both equally guilty. It started with Barack Obama. Barack Obama charged more national security whistleblowers with espionage. 3 times, as I said, 3 times as many national security whistleblowers with espionage as all previous presidents combined. And so he put himself in an ideological and legal box where he was forced to keep charging people with espionage. That's not why the Espionage Act was passed into law, okay? It was not meant to target whistleblowers and truth tellers. Now, Barack Obama did not charge Julian Assange with a crime. He said that he had what he called a New York Times problem. Barack Obama said, if I charge Julian Assange, I have to charge the New York Times, because the New York Times publishes classified information every single day. So he did not charge him with a crime. Donald Trump did charge Julian with a crime. And so the Biden administration inherited the charges from the Trump administration. What Joe Biden could have done at the very beginning of his presidency was to drop the charges. Just walk away from the case and say, look, we don't think we would be able to prove this case. We think it was a mistake for the Trump administration to charge him, and walk away. But they didn't walk away. They doubled down, and they went to the British courts, and they tried over and over and over again at every level in the British court system to find him extraditable. And now they have. So we've gotten ourselves to the point where they either have to send him to the United States and try him on espionage charges, in which case he would face 150 years in prison.
Yeah.
Or you let him go. But you've been so adamant that he should be prosecuted. Now, if you let him go, you look weak. So in the end, he's going to have to plead to something, or he's going to have to be freed by the European Court of Human Rights.
Why do you think Biden didn't retire these charges?
I think Biden didn't want to look weak on security issues. I think
with economic crisis,
exactly. He had a lot of problems when he became president. The economy got worse. The Republicans were yelling at him, and Trump was saying that the election was stolen. And I think that Biden just didn't want to deal with another problem by letting Julian Assange go.
A curiosity that I had, because I never spoke to a ex-CIA, how much that theories from the left about the involvement of CIA in international operations, how the percentage is true or is false?
Well, look at it this way. The mission of the CIA, very simply, is to recruit spies, to steal secrets, and then to analyze those secrets to allow American policymakers to make the best informed policy. So it's the job of the CIA to intercept everybody's cell phone communications, emails, to recruit human sources to steal these inside secrets. This is what they do. This is how they get promoted. If you're a CIA officer, you're not going to get promoted by not stealing secrets. You're not going to get promoted if you don't intercept somebody's cell phone. So yeah, that's what they're out there doing in just about every country in the world.
Stealing secrets, doing that stuff. Do you think there is another way to have an intelligence agency that not using these CIA methods?
Yes.
What do you think about that?
Yes, I'm on record as saying I don't think we need a CIA. I think the CIA should be disbanded, right? We have other methods to protect our country, other methods by which we can make informed policy. We don't need to steal everybody's communications and to infiltrate their governments. There are better, cheaper, more efficient ways to do it. And the primary way is more robust and even-handed diplomacy. You know, if the point of American foreign policy was not to dominate countries or to dominate entire regions, but to engage those countries in partnerships, then we wouldn't need a CIA.
John, I have a personal question. How do you live today? How you spend your time working?
Well, as you might expect, there aren't a lot of companies in the United States that have beaten a path to my door to offer me work.
Right.
So I sort of have to make a living on my own. I have a radio show every day here in Washington. I have a television show once a week called The Whistleblowers, where I interview international whistleblowers every week. I write a column at a website called consortiumnews.com. I write a column for Covert Action Magazine, which is an anti-CIA magazine. And I hope to start a podcast. And you can see behind me, I'm getting ready for my new podcast that I hope to start in the next 2 or 3 weeks. So, you know, a little bit here, a little bit there. I do some speaking, I do some teaching, and I'm able to piece together a living.
Another question I had, you talk about a lot of Julian Assange that's changing, fighting this difficult fight. What do you think about Edward Snowden and another person? What do you think about Glenn Greenwald? This recent positionings, defending free speech in every corner. What do you think about these two persons?
Well, Snowden, I'll say first because he's sort of the easier of the two. I think Snowden is a bona fide American hero. Without Snowden and his revelations, we wouldn't have any idea that the American government was spying on the American people. This is something that is clearly illegal, that the government, the NSA, the CIA, the FBI, they've been doing it since 9/11, and we wouldn't have any idea if Snowden hadn't told us. So I think the country owes him a great debt of gratitude. And I'm happy to have been an early supporter of Snowden. When I was in prison, that's when he released his information. And I wrote him a letter, a public letter and a private letter. And his father came to prison to visit with me. And we passed messages back and forth through a CIA friend that we both had. So I'm proud to have been a very early supporter of Ed Snowden's. I'm proud of what he did. It was the right thing to do. Glenn Greenwald and I went to college together.
Oh,
yes.
Okay. You know him.
I know him. I was a senior, a fourth year when he was first year, and we were both members of the College Democrats organization together. So I remember Glenn very well. We were friends. You know, Glenn has become rich and famous, and he's quite the international personality. I'm not sure that I agree with his some of his most recent unbridled freedom of speech positions, because some of the positions that he has taken could encourage hate speech. But I think his heart is in the right place. And I think he's also done some great service to the American people, especially by getting the Snowden story out there. I like Glenn. I think he's a very
Mhm.
gifted journalist, and I wish him well.
Oh,
You
very
know,
nice.
his husband died recently too, so that was a
Yeah,
very
David
sad.
Miranda, right.
Yes, that was a very sad sad
Mhm.
event. That he, you know, Glenn got through it with great dignity.
Mhm. He do a very well job in Snowden's case and in
Yes,
Vaza Jato's case,
yes,
that
yes.
the messages of
Mhm.
Moro and Dallagnol. A last message for your Brazilian audience. What do you think about this next government? What you Brazilians can do to protect their country, protect their secrets? What do you think about
Yeah.
that?
I'm going to try not to be partisan, but I have to tell you, I think the fact that the Brazilian people have given their confidence to President Lula is a wonderful development. It's a great thing. I think that most of the world expects great things from Brazil, not just from the Brazilian economy, but also from the power of Brazilian diplomacy. Brazil is a major world player, and it's time for Brazil to exercise that power and that authority on the international stage and at the United Nations in the interests of peace. I think the Brazilian people, I would congratulate, frankly, the Brazilian people for saying no to right wing populism. Just like here in the United States, we're trying to do the same thing. But I'm very optimistic for Brazil, and I'm optimistic for the Brazilian people.
Mhm. Even with our problems with the indigenous people, our problems
That's
with oil, our
that's
problems
tough.
with that stuff, right?
That's tough, you know, and this is another thing, and it's not just Brazil, but it's Ecuador and it's Guyana, and you know, any place that has oil, you have to stand up to the American oil companies. Don't let the American oil companies wreck your environment and steal from your people and snuff out your indigenous people. You have to stand up to the big oil companies. That's the key to it. We made the mistake of not standing up to them, and look what they've done domestically in the United States. Look at what's happened to our indigenous people. They don't even have the rights to their own water resources. Don't let that happen to you.
Mhm. I was to finish our interview, but I remember one question.
Sure.
Recently, we have a project of law, like we call PL das fake news,
Yeah.
which likes to regulate these big tech companies, Google, Meta, and Twitter, TikTok, all these companies, because of the hate speech.
Yes.
As a ex agent of CIA, what do you think is
Yeah.
the 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 weight of these big tech companies in the Trump's election,
Right.
Bolsonaro's election, and such attacks of on democracy? We have Brexit in UK, right?
Yes, you're
It's
absolutely right. In the United States, the cost was very high. You know, analysts have estimated that the media in the United States gave Donald Trump in 2016 $1 billion worth of free news coverage, right? Because everybody thought he was a crazy person. Nobody thought that he could actually win the election. They underestimated how unpopular, how deeply unpopular Hillary Clinton was. And the joke is that Hillary Clinton was literally the only person in America who couldn't beat Donald Trump. Well, in part, that was because of the media, because the media just kept promoting him day after day after day with $1 billion worth of free advertising. Um, then we realized the mistake that we had made. And then everybody began to attack Donald Trump. And Donald Trump doesn't take well to attacks. And so he responded with lies and with fake news and pointing the finger at everybody else, that all of his problems and all of the country's problems were the result of his enemies attacking him. And now we are in a position where we all hate each other. We're all at odds politically. Listen, I've lived in Washington for 41 years, and
well,
I have never seen it as angry and as mean spirited as it is now,
mhm,
where people won't even talk to each other if they're members of the opposite political parties.
like
So we've got to we've got to try to turn that around. And I think a lot of it rests on the media outlets to not promote this kind of hatred and political division. And a lot of it comes because of fake news.
Yeah. And these fake news are also a lucrative method,
Oh,
right?
yes,
In
very much so.
politics.
People have made a lot of money promoting this fake news. Yes, it's very dangerous, but it is lucrative.
Yeah. Like the CIA job, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Like
Exactly.
this. John, I love this conversation. There is something I didn't ask you want to add?
Oh, thank you. If your viewers are interested, I publish
Opa.
everything that I write on Substack. You see the spelling of my name there on the screen. It's John Kiriakou at .substack.com. I'm also on Twitter and Facebook. And thanks for the opportunity.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
It's a pleasure.
Pleasure's mine.